The Boys is officially over. That's right. The final episode of the final season is upon us, and thus concludes the near 7-year long run of the Amazon Prime series. Damn, time really flies, and it's hard to believe that so much time has passed since this brutally dark and gory series first released. Back then, superhero movies had a specific niche, with Marvel being the most dominant franchise out there, and the Invincible series not being released for a whole 2 years later. But in that world, The Boys carved its own path as a sort of differentiator from the rest by introducing a satirical and sort of comedic as well as dark and gritty version of the superhero genre, and it was a huge hit. I know when I first watched season 1, I was immediately interested by the complexity of the universe and how it mirrors our own, but adds the fantastical element of superpowers to it. I was intrigued by the depth of all the characters, such as Billy Butcher and Homelander, which showed the most depth out of anyone in the series. But even others, such as Huey and to some degree Starlight, showed promise as well as having depth in terms of character. I think many forget that Butcher was actually an incredibly deep character back in season 1. While he had his darkness, his rage, his anger, he also had his sense of justice, his compassion towards the weak and kind-natured, his charisma, his intelligence, his duality to where he both knows that he's doing the right thing, but also knows that he in many ways is the bad guy. And you can see a certain sense of sadness to it as well, as if being the bad guy is not really who Butcher wants to be, but it feels like who he is forced to be because of the world that he lives in. And you can see that when he interacts with, the people around him, not necessarily those that he's controlling or manipulating, but those that he shows genuine kindness to. You can see that sort of regret in his eyes, and I think that really adds to Butcher as a character back in those days. And then there's the overall plot of The Boys, the twists and the turns, the sense of fear to where the heroes know that they're outmatched and at any point they could be, killed off, the creative and interesting avenues the boys have taken in order to win their battles, the complex weave of infiltration, espionage, and undercover operations that take the boys out of their element, as well as the unique character dynamics of the boys' banter. And let's not forget about the big man himself, Homelander. Homelander in this season was a real menace to behold, someone with power, someone with status, someone with intelligence and the cool to use it. Homelander truly felt untouchable in this season, and I think that over time, Homelander's character really did degrade from his own unique identity to, let's be real, a Donald Trump parody. Now, I get that Homelander eventually needs to lose and that his dependency on love is a part of his conditioning and, all of that stuff, but I think as the seasons progress, the political stances of the characters really did affect how the characters behave a little bit too much, with Homelander being the bad guy and, the creators of The Boys in their mind, Donald Trump being the bad guy. However, as season 1 remains the most separated from this influence, in my opinion, and does a great job at setting up the world and bringing everything, forward in the series. I just wish that people kind of separated politics from, creative stories. I think that, we watch these things to escape the world, not to be reminded of it. And certainly not in this way. We can be reminded of it through like cruelty. We can be reminded of it through, morally grayness, but politics, not really it. But anyway, we have season 2 following soon after, which continues the idea of hope in a hopeless world by introducing Ryan as a character while simultaneously having the boys be on the run from the authorities. Ryan truly represents hope in a hopeless world, as he is the son of Homelander and can easily go rogue if he wanted to, but also consistently shows positive traits that Homelander himself would never display. Alongside this, there is the other notable addition of Stormfront to the series, a character that on the surface appears to play an important role in the season, but actually only serves to set up season 5 much later on. Initially Stormfront was veiled in mystery. She came out of nowhere, joined the Seven, seemed to have connections, seemed to know her way around. And as the sort of plot line continues on, we see the boys begin to research her. We see Homelander begin to prod her as she reveals things about herself. But then once we learn everything about her and she ultimately meets her demise at the hands of Ryan, I think that her character basically just kind of ended. To be honest, I think there's a lot more that they could have done with her character. Personally, I think it would have been a lot more interesting if Stormfront, instead of being enamored with Homelander, was actually disappointed in Homelander, and seeing how the person that took on the best of Vought, the best of, Frederick's research, ended up being a sort of very sensitive, very fragile person. Seeing that maybe turns off Stormfront, and as a result, she ends up betraying Homelander and starts her own coalition to sort of regain her vision, recreate the world in the way that she sees fit. And I think that could have been very interesting because it could have added more factions to the boys as a series and have something else in which the boys need to address besides Homelander, rather than just being a parody of a propaganda influencer, But as well as this, season 2 also has some other good arcs as well, notably A-Train's arc and the beginning of his redemption as his health begins to deteriorate and he suffers the consequences of his actions. We gradually begin to see him understand his rival and enemy Huey as he begins to feel the same kind of powerlessness through the loss of his powers, the same kind of suffering through the loss of his brother's legs. In comparison to Robin, we see him actually begin to help the boys and set the stage for his redemption. And conversely, we actually also see the arc of the Deep, which, to be honest, was a bit of a weird arc that was kind of filled with sort of strange and unnecessary sequences, especially with him singing to his gills. But it does a decent job at demonstrating stagnance in the boys and how some characters will just simply never change. But anyways, moving on to season 3, we get the introduction of the Chad himself, Soulja Boy. And this is very much what everyone remembers from this season. Soulja Boy is actually a character that I enjoy very much, and as the seasons progress, we kind of begin to see a degradation of his character, especially in season 5. But for this initial season, he was a joy on screen. His charisma, his sort of strange one-liners, and almost cowboy-esque aura was a breath of fresh air, and in many ways, he was a likable character as well, with signs of compassion, regret, moral integrity, etc. The one issue I have with Soulja Boy is that I feel as though the writers left too big of a gap between what is said of him in the past and how he acts in the present. In the past, he is described as someone that is abusive, someone that lashes out, someone that is difficult to work with and violent, but when we're introduced to him, he's actually not violent to anyone other than whoever he's in combat with. He keeps his promise to Butcher to help him against Homelander. He has relatively civil conversations with everyone he interacts with. But anyways, alongside this, we also have the introduction of Temp V and the first season ever where we feel like the boys have leveled the playing field and that Homelander is very much on his way to losing. I think that the introduction of Temp V is actually fantastic, and I wish that there was more emphasis and focus put on it. Not to say that there was no focus at all, actually far from it, but I think the idea of Temp V is very interesting. If you become a monster, to rid the world of monsters, is the world a better place? I think that's the core identity and question that Temp V poses, where the boys have an easy way to win, but in order to win, they must become the thing that they're fighting against. It calls into question why they're fighting in the first place. It calls into question what victory really is, and it forces them to assess themselves in comparison to Soups. But I think that Temp V and Soulja Boy really take front and center stage in this season and are essentially the reason why this season is so loved and so remembered. In my opinion, I feel like Season 4 is the weakest season in the entire franchise. So weak, in fact, that I didn't even remember what the season was overall about, and I had to research it to find out, despite the fact that I watched the entire season on release, and it's a newer season than those that came before. But anyways, Season 4 is largely focused on the idea of political unrest, with Homelander taking more control as Starlight is more out of the public eye in a world that is fractured by Homelander supporters versus Starlight supporters. The boys has always had a touch of satire and parody ever since the beginning, and when the series was first released, it was actually quite refreshing. But it was also refreshing because it was subtle, because it was intentional, because it was supplementary to the overall plot and narrative of the story. But it seems as though somewhere along the way, the writers, upon making Season 4, forgot this concept entirely and is used as a setup and explanation for why Homelander has assumed control in Season 5. If this was what The Boys was all about ever since the beginning, then I probably would have accepted it a bit more as part of the narrative of the show. But in fact, it wasn't a part of the show at all. Back in Season 1, the majority of the world was actually on the same page. Starlight and Homelander were both a part of the Seven, Soups were considered heroes, and the Boys was the only driving force that had any kind of differing thoughts from the rest of society. But yet, for some reason, they shoehorn it into Season 4 as the front and center aspect of the series and pretend that it's been a part of the show since the beginning, when in fact it hasn't. Now, thankfully, in this season, some characters actually did have some meaningful arcs outside of the plot, largely being A-Train and Billy Butcher, as they're both confronted with the wrong that they've done in their life and are trying to do better. To be honest, I probably would have made Season 4 about V1 to begin with, which I feel like would have helped the final season not feel so rushed and oddly paced as many The Boys fans feel that it was. I think it would have been a perfect segue after the addition of Soulja Boy from Season 3, who has V1, and it could have touched upon the idea of mortality and the beauty of life, something that could have tied into Huey's arc as someone who lost Robin. It could have tied into Butcher's arc and his sort of suicidal desire to take down his enemies. It could have helped with MM's arc, who is always scared because of his trauma with Soulja Boy and how, his father or someone died because of Soulja Boy. And that could have also tied into Soulja Boy's arc and his sort of regret over his immortal life that he lived. This could have been a plot point on its own. Like, the whole series could have been about this if it wanted to. But anyways, speaking of Season 5, we now have the final season, which in my mind is tied for the second worst season alongside Season 4. But don't get me wrong, there's still some great moments in Season 5, like the A-Train's Quicksilver montage and full circle character arc moment. I was a big fan. That was a moment and a half. That was like one of my favorite moments in the entire series. It was cool, it was badass, it was, fulfilling, it was symbolic, it was everything that I could have wanted. And it was in Season 5, We also had Frenchie's sacrifice, which plot-wise is a bit sus, but also I think it was a beautiful moment as well, where, Frenchie had taken so many lives in the service of his own, and so he ends his life sacrificing his own in the service of others. Frenchie, he'd been there from the start, and it was sad to see him go as well. But there's also some strange and questionable moments in this season, like why Butcher is now seemingly only slightly more evil inclined rather than completely off the rails like the ending of season 4 implied that he was. Not to mention that there's so many unnecessary moments in this season that kind of bloat it and make it feel very disconnected from the pacing that it's meant to have. I feel like a lot of things have detracted from the plotline in general in this season, such as that one episode that literally was purely dedicated for side characters, which I feel as though a single episode in a season that only has 8 episodes, that is also the final season of the franchise, should not be solely dedicated to side characters. Like, not even side characters in the main cast, like pure literal side characters, like dedicated to like Sister Sage, dedicated to like Firecracker, you know, like that's like if it was dedicated to like or like Frenchie or like, you know, Starlight or Butcher, I'd be like, okay, let's go, let's do this. But it's dedicated to like people that don't really matter that much to be worth it. You know, like personally, I just would have preferred a more cohesive season with a more sort of straightforward direction. And as a longtime fan of the series, that did kind of disappoint me. But I think that the overall plotline that they did with V1 was very interesting. I think that there were a lot of cool moments in this season. I think there were a lot of emotional moments in this season. Not so much character growth, but more so just character moments. But yeah, overall, despite my heavy criticisms, I still love The Boys as a franchise. You know, it's why I've done so many videos on it up until this point. And as a series that ultimately is still a vast departure from the standard superhero media we're used to, I think in many ways The Boys has altered the course of hero shows forever. You know, whenever we spoke of hero shows in the past, it used to always be sort of kids shows. It used to always be kind of like morally good. It used to be kind of like the good guys win kind of thing. But now we are introduced to dynamic superhero media because of The Boys, because of its gritty nature, because of its dark nature, because of its complex character sort of aspects. And I will always be grateful to The Boys for bringing this to, you know, the world and showing us what superhero movies, well, I guess movies as well, but also superhero sort of media and what it can be in terms of complex storytelling. And I'm excited for what, you know, VOD Rising has in store. I'm excited for what The Boys Mexico has in store, especially with their entire focus being on those series from this point forward. And of course, you know, I'll cover it on my channel as well when it releases. Let you guys know all about it. And you know, thank you to The Boys for giving us a great series. I'll always be a fan. But as always, thanks for watching.